Let's see what's up this season. Brynhildr in the Darkness. It doesn't look like much interesting. Kind of generic. Wait. Hang on. It has the same writer as Elfen Lied? Today on Red Stripe Reviews, Brynhildr in the Darkness. I hope you might be able to appreciate that I do not take the phrase "from the same writer as Elfen Lied" lightly. Along with Gantz, it was one of the series that left the biggest impact during my formative years as a young anime fan, which would now be 10 years ago, 2004, when I was a wee 14 years old. In that early 2000s period, Elfen Lied and Gantz were really something else, capital E experiences. The volume of blood and guts spilled could together fill a swimming pool. They brought cruelty, brutality, the dark side of psychology, all up to 11, and shoved it straight into my face. And they both did it while still being sufficiently entertaining and, perhaps more importantly, engaging shows. How I managed to watch and endure either of them at, once again, 14 years old is a mystery where the most plausible answer seems to be because I saw the South Park movie when I was 10, but even at that young I could appreciate that there was some serious substance beyond their gory shock value moments. That Gantz's real draw was the suspense and dread from the psychological and moral clusterfucks rather than the shocking violence, that most of the true horror of Elfen Lied was at the hands of humans rather than the superpowered Diclonius. And I loved the hell out of both of them. Now, in hindsight, Elfen Lied may not be the stroke of pure brilliance that it seemed to be in my younger mind. Gantz has held up better, but it was still good, and most other series prior to it or afterwards still cannot do brutal nearly as well. Oftentimes, the likes of Black Lagoon, Deadman Wonderland, and Hellsing just ring hollow. That's how much Elfen Lied has spoiled me. Naturally, then, comes one of the fundamental questions. Where would Brynhildr in the Darkness stand in that scheme? Going into the first couple of episodes, I had no idea, and in fact, both wrote and said at the time that I was worried for it, because it was all over the place. The first thing we get told is the tragic backstory of our main dude, Ryota Murakami, which has to do with the tragic loss of the childhood friend he was in love with, Kuroneko. He only knew her by that nickname, and also by a trio of moles under her armpit. Remember this, it becomes important later on, I'm not shitting you. She had a thing for astronomy and aliens, and in fact claimed to have seen an alien for herself, and would show Ryota. But, accidents happened, they both took a big fall, he survived, she died. It's all told and shown in a way that leaves only minimal emotional impact, and up montage this is not. The only one detail that really affected me, while hospitalized, Ryota was told that Kuroneko was also hospitalized, but upon getting out, finds out they lied about that. She was dead. Damn. In the years since, he's taken up the pursuit of aliens in an attempt to atone for his guilt over her death, including as the sole member of his high school's astronomy club. But then everything he knows is flipped on its head when a transfer student arrives in his class that looks so much like a growed-up Kuroneko. She's even named, I'm not shitting you, Kuroha Neko. An amazing name in its own right by the meeting an actual dude named just in time sort of amazing. And the very first thing Ryota does upon seeing her? Demand that he see her armpits, because he's checking for moles. Yeah, what the fuck? This is going to be a shit series, isn't it? One scene later, it's poolside party time in PE. Ogle the shit out of Kuroha Neko's admittedly ample assets, shall we? But then, during underwater lessons, the metal filter grate comes loose, the pump starts going crazy, and a girl's knee gets caught. Everyone's trying to get her free, but it's not working. Cue Kuroha. I knew this would happen. Today, 2 students at this school are going to die. It's not overstating things that at this point, the main things I thought were, holy shit, are they seriously going to off this chick right here at the very beginning? Plus, and Kuroha here knows it? We're not even past the 10-minute mark, by the way. But then the ground bizarrely collapses and destroys the filter pipe, saving the poor girl in the pool. What the hell did I just see? Not a goddamn clue, but that sure got my attention real good. So wait, is this going to actually be an amazing series? Not that I can tell anytime soon, because it's still all over the place. A good amount of shitty comedy stuff hovering around armpit quality, yet mixed in is also potent mystery and science fiction intrigue, which genuinely pulled me in. Overall, yeah, at this point, I'm definitely seeing the fingerprints very reminiscent of Elfen Lied, for better and worse. The last notable thing from the introduction, Kuroha meets Ryota after school to warn him that he is supposed to be dead student number 2, and tells him how to avoid it. But of course, he comes down with that dangerous combination of skeptical and curious, and tries testing his fate instead, meaning that he's about to be crushed by a boulder. But then Kuroha saves his stupid ass, revealing she has powers. He inquires, she says she's a witch, but that seems to be a misnomer because she's got a straight from the Matrix plug-looking thing on the back of her neck. And thus, as is natural for a show with direct lineage from Elfen Lied, this is, in fact, an escaped experiment story, and Kuroha is not the only one of her kind either. Do I mind the repeat concept? Nope. It's handled significantly differently here, and has some serious teeth of its own as a result. The experiments on the Run Sci-Fi angle is, in fact, the strongest aspect of Brynhildr in the Darkness. The more that the action and story are focused around it, the better of a show this becomes, and something practically magical happens once the third episode comes around. It becomes much more about the science fiction underpinnings than was done in the introductory episodes, and stays that way for the duration of the remaining series, meaning that we can strike out shit series from the list of possibilities. It helps that the different witches' powers are pretty damn well done. Example time! We've got Kuroha's destruction magic for one, but early on we also meet a fellow witch, Kana, a quadriplegic with powers of prediction, i.e. she can see the future. But it's not the absolute future, as it were, but rather that sort of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle type construct, where the very act of awareness about what happens later on could potentially change what happens later on. This is why Kuroha knew that the girl and Ryota were supposed to die, and why she was then able to prevent both deaths from happening. This shit could be the hook for your entire series. Hell, it was Mirai Nikki's, and yet this is only one of multiple powers at play. Hanging up or being unable to use magic after reaching one's power-wielding limits or pressing the hang-up button ends up being a well-thought-out and significant mechanic too. But really, so much of what the series does right comes from something else entirely. Let's talk again about science fiction. It can be visually dazzling, awe-inspiring, enjoyably puzzling, and a bunch of other shit, but if my favorite part about it is how it can encourage a particular kind of thoughtfulness, my second favorite part would likely have to be its potential for engendering a particular kind of empathy. These characters have been put through such unfamiliar, sometimes crazy, often otherworldly situations, and though we'll never go through them ourselves, we can still see how these characters feel and react toward the circumstances upon which we then reflect accordingly. Brynhildr has one aspect of its sci-fi concept where this happens. It starts in the first couple of episodes, through Kuroha and Kana's absolute conviction that they are both going to be dead within a week. They both state it so unflinchingly, so fatalistically, that it's genuinely harrowing to watch and hear. Now, the obvious speculation as to why they're so convinced they'll be dead so soon, that the people they escaped from are gonna eventually find and kill them, right? Well, the third episode explicitly shines a light on all of that, and the reason is not the obvious. The actual reason? It deserves finding out on its own terms, but suffice to say, it's much more unnerving than the obvious. Kuroha and Kana are not overstating the gravity of their situation. They're perfectly justified in their belief that they won't be around much longer. And that really gets down to the core of Brynhildr's story. Sure, it's an experiments on the run plot in a similar vein to the writer's prior Elfen Lied, except where it's not. And where it's not is the suggestion that, superpowered though Kuroha and company may be, they are also extraordinarily vulnerable, to the degree that their chances of survival outside their lab whittle away as each day passes, even if their former captors were to do nothing to get them back. It's bleak, scary shit. The central thread of the whole series then becomes Ryota and company's attempt to cheat the witch's inevitable doom. And Brynhildr mines plenty of dramatic mileage from the setup by depicting how facing such a reality informs the personalities and actions of the witches, right down to adding bittersweet poignancy to the more slice-of-lifey scenes. Kuroha, Kana, the other witches who come around as friend or foe, they're all pretty well fleshed out characters for a 13-episode series, and what they're going through does a lot in making them that compelling. Weirdly enough, it even somewhat justifies the female harem setup with Ryota in the middle, and especially with the role taken up by Kazumi, a witch who shows up as part of the main gang later on. In harem terms, Kazumi's role is the horny one, out to get herself into the guy's pants using the most forward way possible. In paper, this is just begging for a shitstorm of a character, one likely end up more annoying and unlikable than funny to boot, but then you've got to remember, these witches are facing the possibility of imminent death in a short amount of time. So what, are you really going to hold it against Kazumi for wanting to get laid before she meets her maker? There's real desperation behind what would be a mere harem running joke in a more 2-bit series, and it adds a lot of well-needed humanity to Kazumi's character and actions. I mean, I guess it's another way of saying that, long story short, Brynhildr mostly successfully convinced me to not mind the distracting harem stuff by cleverly tying it into the sci-fi concepts. And while we're on the topic of character, because it needs to be mentioned, Ryota Murakami. He's halfway aight, surprisingly. His elfin lead predecessor, Kota, was zero-personality harem cardboard and utterly useless except as a goddamn plot MacGuffin, so I guess it's in part a matter of no way to go but up, but credit where credit is due. Ryota is a step or two better than zero-personality harem cardboard. Can't cry for shit, though. And sweet Jesus, his photographic memory and intelligence are actually useful, credibly useful, to the witches under his care. So he does enough to not hold Brynhildr back, thank God, letting the better-written witches do their thing. Combine that with solid and even sometimes suspenseful action, and Brynhildr in the Darkness is seriously potent. In many ways, I like it better than its predecessor Elfin Lied. It's superior in concept, the characters are better, the series just holds up well, it's a compelling watch, and I very much enjoyed the vast majority of it. But, sad to say, it's still got some serious problems, structurally speaking, that dampen its high. The first big one? I constantly got the feeling that Brynhildr was pulling punches in how it depicted some things. Basically, it's exceedingly obvious that they were censoring themselves. I can only hope that this was shit done only for the broadcast version and that the real shit has actually been saved for the Blu-ray and DVD releases, but I was watching the version put up on Crunchyroll, which is the broadcast edition. Not that I'm going to complain too much about using lens flare to cover up all the girls' naughty bits, but I do take issue with how Studio Arms appears to be intentionally framing certain action shots to cut out huge chunks of the blood and gore. So, yes, I'm saying it's a real problem that Brynhildr is not violent enough. What a monster I am, right? But really, it bothers me because in cases like this, it's important to the theme and atmosphere. The predecessor is superior in that regard. It pulled no punches when it came to what it showed, so much so that apparently it was completely unfit for broadcast before Otaku O'Clock in Japan, but it worked because it played a part in getting across the danger and cruelty of what went on. Brynhildr, by not doing the same, lacks much of that visceral impact, which could have farther improved the experience. It works about as well as censoring out the body horror from Game of Thrones, if you want some reference. The second serious problem, though, cannot be fixed by an uncut edition. This series is endgame. The last 3 episodes of the total 13 escalate to such ridiculous proportions on top of being a complete rush job. In other words, it all ends anticlimactically, and the reason for it is all too apparent. The manga, as it turns out, is approximately a 100-chapter affair, and the anime went ahead and adapted the entirety of it in 13 episodes. So we end up with 10 well-paced episodes, but then because Studio Arms had to truncate and squash so much material in order to reach the conclusion, we naturally get an unsatisfactory end. I mean, it's not necessarily bad, mind you, but it's such a downgrade from the prior episodes, and that's still a real shame. This series really should have had at least double the episode count if it was gonna adapt that breadth of content. And that about does it, so let us conclude. I had some major reservations and worries about Brynhildr in the Darkness in the beginning, but on the whole, it ended up being a markedly more compelling and engaging watch than its generic presentation and harem comedy trappings let on. Under the plastic surface lies an unnervingly dark science fiction heart. Frankly, it's got a lot to make me consider it a year-wide favorite, but it could have been even more if given more leeway to be rated R, and it's a real shame that the series couldn't stick its landing so well. But nonetheless, it's got too much merit to say that such issues ruin the whole series. Far from it, in fact. Thank you for watching this review. I hope you found it enlightening or at least entertaining. This is Justin, now signing off.